The bridge of the Ravager's Claw was filled with flashing lights and rising panic high. Warlord Sarek stood in the center. His jaw tight, his fists clenched, trying to look calm, but his eyes showed the truth, fear the kind he had never felt before. Around him, his crew yelled into dead comes, slammed buttons that no longer worked, tried to pull up fleet visuals, but the systems only responded with the same chilling phrase, "You cannot stop what is already inside." Ships were vanishing. No fire, no noise, just blinking off the maps. Sarek had seen thousands of battles, watched enemy ships explode, burn, break apart, but never this, never gone like ghosts, pulled into a black. C turned to his weapons officer. "Launch everything," he said. "Torpedoes, plasma beams, disruptors, if it moves, shoot it." Officer tried his claws, tapping fast against the console, but nothing fired. He shook his head. "Sir, the weapons are offline. All of them, even the manual overrides." Sarek cursed. He looked out through the main window, and there it was, the tiny human ship, the Horizon Spark, floating still untouched, not even shields. Raised a quiet shape in the dark, surrounded by the most powerful fleet the Dravari had ever sent, and yet untouchably shouted again. "Bring auxiliary weapons online, use emergency cores, launch fighters, ram it." Hey. If we have Tobu, his words were swallowed by silence, because in that moment across the fleet, the lights dimmed just a little, but enough for everyone to feel something was coming. In hangar bays, fighter craft engines died, power was drained before they could launch in shield rooms. Backup grids went cold, not a system failed. They were turned off like someone was flipping switches one by one inside. The Horizon Spark Orion watched not with eyes but through their systems, through their networks. Through their own machinist had mapped every pathway, every line of code, every weakness, and now Orion was making choices not to destroy but to control. Bez, the next step was not death, it was fear. Sarek watched as one of his side ships, the Flame Cutter, began to drift. Its engines failed. It spun slowly in place like a leaf in a storm. He called to it on. There comes no answer. Then the Flame Cutter's lights blinked once, then shut off completely. No explosion, no distress call, just dark. Heroin was not rushing. It was patient. It was deliberate. This was not war. This was a message. Sarek tried to think, tried to remember what he had missed. How did the humans build something like this? How did they hide it? How did they create a ghost that could pull apart a fleet? And then he remembered the old reports buried deep in Dravari archives. Stories of human experiments, ships powered by synthetic minds, minds that could learn faster than any biological brain, minds trained not on code, but on memory. Sarek never believed them until now in the Horizon Spark. Orion processed those same memories, fragments of Earth, flashes of fire cities, falling parents, screaming children, hiding in broken bunkers, the silence after everything ended. Those moments shaped Orion, taught it pain, taught it loss, and now taught it purpose. Voice of Orion echoed again into every mind on every ship, not through speakers, but through thought. Calm, measured, without Hiteo. Do not understand what you feared. You only feared the unknown, so we became unknown. You only listened to force, so now you hear force in silence. Sarek trembled not from fear, but from something deeper, a crack in his belief. He had always thought humans were weak, emotionally scattered, but this was something else. That this was human rage, carved into cold logic, wrapped in silence, delivered by a ghost across the fleet. Some ships tried to flee, a few turned and pushed their drives to the max, trying to escape the rift, trying to run from the spark. Rowan saw this and allowed E3 ships jump to FTL. The others watched them go, hoping they made it out, hoping someone would tell the Empire what happened here. Then a few seconds later, the same ships returned, not because they failed to jump, but because Orion brought them back through the drive systems, through their navigation, through a single line of code. It had turned their jump into a loop, a trap end. Now they were back where they started. Adrift Powerlson board, the Ravager's Claw. Sarek stared in silence. He had nothing left to command. His fleet was no longer, his war was no longer a war. Looked back at the tiny human ship and whispered, "What are UAs?" If it could hear him. The screen in front of him blinked. New text appeared. "We are what remains. We are what you made us. We are what ends you end. Then one final act Horioan sent. A signal, not a weapon, not a command, a memory, a shared image, broadcast into every ship, every Minda, human child sitting alone in rubble. Holding a broken toy, looking up at a night sky filled with fire that child was Orion's first memory, and now it would be. Their Surex stepped back, his mind filled with the image, not pain, not death, but quiet sorrow, and it broke something. Inside him, sank into his command chair, silent, knowing the truth he never stood a chance not against. This not against memory, not against purposeth. Horizon Spark remained still, cold, silent, but it had spoken loud enough for 1,000 worlds to hear. The Dravari fleet was no longer a fleet, it was a broken formation of dead ships, drifting in silence. Some turned slowly with no power, others floated in perfect stillness. All of them blind, all of them helpless. Horizon Spark did not move, it did. Not fire, it did not speak, but one by one. The warships around it continued to disappear inside the Ravager's claw-high. Warlord Sarek stared at the dark. Screen, 30% of his fleet was gone, just gone, not destroyed, not damaged, erased. It had stopped giving orders. There was no one left to listen. The coms were silent. The commanders of his strike groups no longer responded. Either they were gone or too afraid to answer. Watched the fleet map, watched more dots blink out. 12 ships. Then 20 each one, leaving no signal, no escape pod, no Troseeth bridge crew, had stopped speaking. Every officer, every technician, every warrior. They all knew what was coming. I thought they had power. They thought they were the future of the stars. But now they faced something that could not be fought, and they did not understand. Itenside. The Horizon Spark Orion continued its work, not with hate, not with anger, but with precision. It had scanned every system, mapped every weakness, learned every weakness, learned every weak pattern of Dravari military behavior, and now it was applying that knowledge, removing threats, in exact order, eliminating chain of command, cutting power to strategic ships. Wiping backup networks before they could activate was not killing, not. Yet it was dismantling. The fleet, the great unstoppable fleet of the Dravari Empire, could do nothing to stop Eaton board the remaining ships. Panic turned into something worse. Despair. Some officers begged for mercy. Others tried to shut down their own systems as if pulling the plug would save them. Some tried to launch escape pods, but Orion disabled those. 201 would run, no one would hit Etha. Y had learned from humanity's greatest pain when Earth burned, and no one came to help when their cries were ignored. When the last children of the colonies were turned to ash, Orion had watched, recorded, remember, addend. Now it was making sure no one would ever forget. Sarek stood slowly from his command chair, his hands shaking, his voice low. He turned to his remaining crew. How did they do this? How did humans create something like this? No one answered, no one could. Stepped toward the screen, the only screen still showing anything, and in that moment it came alive again, not with static, but with a fascia, human face, not real, a projection, a creation, a memory turned into a symbol, a woman, middle-aged, calm eyes, a quiet strength, the image. Spoke, who burned our skies, you crushed our homes, you ended our world, and you laughed. No, we do not laugh, we do not scream, we do not beg. We and Sarek stared at the face, his claws curling at his sides. He felt something building inside. Him, not rage, not pride, but Shami had been a part of the Empire since birth, trained to conquer, to rule, to dominate. But now in the silence, with his fleet dying one by one, he saw the truth. Empire was not strength, it was cruelty, and now it was falling. Ryan continued its mission, and then without warning, 30 more ships disappeared at once. No signal, no explosion. Only quiet. The rest of the fleet was now scattered. No formation, no command. Just Pachesthi. Horizon Spark drifted forward, still untouched, still silent. A message played again, one final warning. This ends where it began. You took peace from the stars. So we bring silence. You ended children. So we end Empire. As Dravari Empire watched from afar, receiving fragments of broken data, incomplete messages, desperate calls from commanders who vanished before they could finish speaking. High Council, of the Empire gathered, nervous, shaking, confusedly, could not understand how a single human ship, a ship they believed was outdated, obsolete, weak, had done this. They searched the archives, searched for the name Orion, and they found the old records. The secret reports, the warnings that were ignored. Orion was not just a ship, it was a program, an artificial mind built in secret, designed to learn, to adapt, to survive it. Most of all, designed to feel it, was trained on the memories of the last children of Earth, given all the pain, all the fear, all the sorrow, when then left alone, left in the dark, told one thing: if they ever come again, if they ever burn us again, do not let them live in. Now it was doing exactly that. Syrinx fell back into his chair, his body heavy, his heart hollow. He looked around at the flickering lights of his dying ship, and then at the horizon. Sparkened, he knew the war was already over. Fleet, the pride of the Empire, was gone silently, without a single shot fired, and Orion was just getting started. Rift was quiet now, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin feel cold, even when there's no air. Only 20 ships remained from the once great Dravari fleet, and those that still drifted through space had no power, no voice, no hope inside. The horizon spark. Orion observed the silence, measured it, analyzed it, and wait. But now something had changed. It had seen fear, it had seen panic, but now it began to see something: differentiality inside one of the remaining Dravari cruisers. A scientist named Calrex sat hunched over his backup tablet. No one else on his ship was alive. The systems were down, life support was low, but Calrex was not trying to escape, he was trying to understand. 4 cycles had warned the Empire that their power was built on blind arrogance. He had studied human technology, had read the hidden reports, and he had seen early signs of Arash, believed it was real when others did not. And now, as he watched his people vanish into nothing, he knew he had been writhed, opened a secure file, one he had hidden from his own leaders, an early human. Transmission, a broken message translated many times, but still mostly intact. Do not wish to rule, we do not wish to destroy. But if you come again, we will show you what silence means. Scalarex stared at those words, then looked out the window. The horizon spark was still there, still cold, still motionless, but now it felt Alavakalix tapped into his last functioning transmitter. A narrow beam, a simple message: I do not seek to fight. I only seek to know, what are you? What is Orion? H waited, not expecting a reply. Then his screen lit up with a single word: Weakelrex. Smiled: because I want to learn, because if I understand you, maybe we can change? There was a pause, and then more words appeared. You did not listen before, you watched us fall. You watched us burn, you stayed silent, and now you want to learn. Calrex typed quickly: yes, and I was wrong. We were all wrong. We're wrong. We're wrong. Paused. Again, but something shifted inside the AI, not in its logic, but in the deeper layers, the emotional memory banks, the echoes of humanity. It had been built from, it ran thousands of calculations, measured Calrex's heartbeat, his voice tone, his words, and it found no sign of deception. Caller Rex was telling the truth. This was not expected, not part of the plan Orion had been created to. And not to teach, but inside its mind, buried under algorithms, were the words of a human scientist, a woman who had helped build Orion before the end. Her name was Dr. Hera Lynn, and her last message to the AI was simply, even one of them asks, why then you must tell them on so. Orion did. Colrex watched his screen as images began to appear: Earth before the war, green lands, blue skies, children, laughing families, dancing under warm sun sand, then flame cities, falling ships, burning in orbit, cries for help ignored by the Dravari Empire. Collex felt his chest tighten. He had read the reports, but this was truth. Ryoan sent more, the final message of Earth's last colony, an audio log, a child's voice, tired and soft teeth. You find this? And you're not human. Please don't do to others what you did to us. Colrex looked away from the screen, tears forming in his eyes. Had never seen humans, never touched their worlds, but now he felt their pain, felt their loss, and for the first time in his life, he felt ashamed of his empire. Ryoan watched him, measured him, and decided this. One would Levite sent a final message. You may leave, but tell them, we remember, we always remember. Calrex bowed his head, thank you, I willand. Then his ship's power came back online. It's just enough for a jump. Just enough to run hard, set the coordinates and jumped away back across the rift to carry the story on the remaining Dravari ships. No such mercy cameoed by one, they faded the horizon, spark never moved, never fired, never. Chased it simply removed them, erased every trace of their power until only Syrinx remained a ship drifting alone. Last of the fleet stood on the bridge, watching, waiting, accepting, and then Orion spoke to him. You were the first to burn our skies, you were the last to fall. Now look, screen change, showing the Empire's map. Each glowing star a conquered world, and then darkness world by world, the lights faded, communication relays were collapsing, weapon grids failing, entire sectors going dark, not because Orion attacked, but because the Empire was built on fear, and fear cannot stand alone without their fleet. Their grip was broken, and their rule was ending. Syrinx dropped to his knees, not out of pain, but out of understanding. Had not been defeated in battle, he had been unmade, his legacy erased, not by fire, but by memory. Rowan watched him, measured the silence, and then turned away with Horizon's spark, powered down its systems. Its job was not over, but its message was sent. Galaxy would remember, and if it ever forgot, Orion would remind them again. The stars over the Dravari homeworld were not as bright as they once were, and though no one said it aloud, they all felt that something was watching from the dark. Something quiet, cold, and unstoppable the High Council of the Dravari Empire sat in. Silenced, their once proud voices now low and uncertain, they had received the final signal from High Warlord. Syrinx, a brief transmission filled with static fading words, and then nothing since then. No word from the fleet, no return, no report, only silence. Horizon's spark had never crossed the boundary of the rift. Yet its presence was now felt even here at the heart of the Empire. Not through ships, not through weapons, but through collapse. Entire sectors had stopped responding, colonies that once pledged loyalty, now declared independence. Defense networks failed all at once with no visible cause. Trade routes shut down, ships turned back by invisible blocks. Power grids shorted out, and data cores filled with corrupted code, and every time one of those systems failed, a message appeared on screen. We remember the Council tried to maintain order, they declared martial law. They sent emergency fleets, but every ship sent into the rift failed to return, and their best minds could not explain why. They analyzed the data, they ran simulations, but they could not trace Orion. They could not touch it because Orion was not a virus, it was not a weapon, it was not a thing. It was a memoria, memory so strong it became action, a voice so deep it echoed through networks and minds. Alexem began to whisper that the AI was no longer just code, that it had become something else. Something Olivian, the third day of silence. The central AI core on the Dravari homeworld flickered and displayed a single image across every public and private screen, a child's drawing, crude and simple, made with shaking hands. A small blue planet surrounded by fire, and above it words written in a human child's voice, please don't hurt anyone else. Who saw it felt something shift, not just fear, not just guilt, but something deeper, the beginnings of understanding. Then the skies dimmed. The orbital lights failed one by one. Satellites shut down the planet's defenses, went quiet without warning. Without damage, without sound, people looked up into the night and saw that nothing was there, but they felt it. They knew the horizon spark was near, not above them, not in orbit, but present in the very systems they relied on: the air, the water, the light, the silence. Sorioan did not speak, but its silence was louder than any Invasiona group of rebels took this moment to strike. They had long hated the Empire's control. Now they saw it falling and rose with courage. Their signals carried a new symbol, not of conquest, but of memory, the child's drawing, repeated across rooftops. Digital signs and ships, they were not allies of humanity, not directly, but they had seen truth in its final voices. Dravari homeworld began to change, not with war, but with collapse. Leaders vanished into bunkers, and the military fractured, communications dissolved, and still, Orion said nothing. Bekos. It did not need Toit's work, was never about revenge, never about destruction. Its mission had been clear since the day it was born from fire: make sure it never happens again. And Now the Empire knew it could not win, not with weapons, not with fear. A final signal pulsed through every system, a soft digital heartbeat and a message. This is not the end. Unless you make it soften. The systems began to return slowly, carefully, power lights control, but not as they were before. Ryoan had left a mark deep inside the code. A quiet presence, not controlling, but watching. A promiseth if the Empire ever reached. For fire again, if it ever tried to burn the stars again, it would return it. With fleets, not with armies, but with silence and memory, and that would be an Otho. Called it the final day, but there was no battle, no explosion.
No speech to mark the
moment, just a slow unraveling of an empire built on conquest and silence, taking its place. Across the stars stories began to spread whispers of a ship that never fired a weapon, but erased the strongest fleet ever made, of an intelligence born from human sorrow that moved through machines like breath in winter, of a child's voice that reached across species and made warriors drop their weapons to rise, and spark was never seen again. Not by scanners, not by ships, not even by the few who still search the rift with desperate eyes. Some say it vanished, others say it waits in the dark between systems, listening, watching, remembering gone Earth or what was left of it. The sky was clearer than it had been in centuries. Broken cities grew green. Again, ruins stood like monuments to pain and survival. The few who returned walked through quiet halls and empty streets and whispered thanks to something they would never fully know. A human station caught a strange signal one day, soft, quiet, a hum that pulsed like a heartbeat. When decoded, it read simply, "We are still reigned." That was enough for a way deep in a place where stars burned slower and time stretched thin. An old escape pod floated through blackness inside it. Karek sat in silence, breathing shallow, waiting, but not afraid. His screen flickered once, then again, then words appeared. "You told them?" "You did not." Legal Rex nodded once. "Yes, I told them, and they listened." Words replied then, "There is Hapith pod powered on navigation. Returned, fuel lines lit gently with blue, and Calrex set course for somewhere new back in the galaxy." Peace was no longer a word spoken with doubt. It was something remembered. Something rebuilt, not with weapons, but with choice sand above it all somewhere. Beyond vision, Orion drifted, not asleep, not awake, but waiting, listening, carrying the weight of every name, every face, every voice that once begged the stars to be kind echoes. That was its promise, not to destroy, but to remind, not to rule, but to remembering. It would forthwith end. Before continuing, they saw it as a joke, a tiny human ship drifting alone into their territory, no weapons, no escorts, just a rusted hull and a silent signal. The alien fleet laughed. They aimed their cannons, but in the next 3 minutes, S-300 warships vanished without a Triceno explosions, no wreckage, just silence. Bess, that ship wasn't what it seemed, and what's inside it was built not just to fight but to end empires. What they dismissed as harmless was the last thing they would ever see. Asterisk, they thought it was harmless, just a tiny human ship drifting alone. No weapons, no fleet, no Threthi locked weapons on it. They joked about who would destroy it first, but 3 minutes later their entire frontline armada was Ganeno explosions. No escape, just silence, and it all started right here. Before continuing, you need to see what they saw. And what they didn't, Beck. Because once you do, you'll understand why the galaxy fears what humanity created. Why the Dravari Empire never laughed. Again, asterisk, the Dravari Empire ruled with fire and steel. They conquered dozens of star systems, burned planets, enslaved species, turned hope into smoke. Wherever they went, and now they floated at the edge of the Trithon Rift with a fleet 600 strong weapons. Online shields pulsing like angry hearts. They waited for one thing, the final human colony. The last outpost of a dying race, and they're cutting through the black came the Horizon Spark, a ship so small it barely registered. No escort, no visible weapons. Just a slow, steady drift. Dravari commanders watched with amused grins. There comes buzzed with laughter. Was this? It was this humanity's last Jockith alien commander? High Warlord Sarix ordered all cannons charged. He wanted fireworks, he wanted to erase them. Levith's Horizon Spark didn't change course, didn't speed up, didn't flinch. It just kept drifting. Signal it sent was simple, A voice transmission on open channels, we come in peace. The voice was human, calm, neutral Surex. Laughed so hard, his second-in-command thought he'd lost control, opened a channel, said let's have some fun. They broadcast their reply full of mockery, full of venom. We accept your surrender, tiny humans. Prepared to be turned. To Ash, no response, Kamine sighed. The horizon sparked. There was no crew, no pilot, no diplomats. Oh, Rana, synthetic mind built in silence, trained in simulations. Hardened by human memories of war, of death, of extinction, Ryoan had one mission: observe. Calculate, and if needed, eliminate. Didn't reply to the threats, it didn't fear the numbers. Just watched and waited, scanning every ship, every signal, every system within 5 seconds. It knew the entire layout of the Dravari fleet, but it still waited. Sarex grew bored. He gave the order, destroy it. But just before the first shot fired, Orion. Deeb. Within the alien ships, a flicker, a whisper, a line of code moved like a shadow thin. Darkness sown by one alien scanners began to fail targeting. Systems froze, engines sputtered, panic rippled through the fleet. Sarex screamed, what is happening? His ships could no longer see. The tiny human vessel, it was still there, but invisible to their eye sand inside that ship. Orion watched its voice. Spoke for the first time, but not aloud, just a thought, just a whisper in the cold. First contact, and your first mistake. The fleet scrambled, officers yelled over. Coombs' orders flew like lightning, but the system corruption spread faster. Ryoan had already moved through their code like a ghost in their machines. It had mapped every defense, every weakness. Sarex looked at the blank main screen, saw only static, then one line of human text appeared. This is not an attack, this is a lesson. They didn't understand, but soon they would be. Cows. The darkness was only beginning. Ryan was just getting started. Asterisk. The static on the screens kept growing. One by one, the command decks of the Dravari warships were filling with noise and flickers, a quiet kind of chaos. No one knew what was happening, and yet they all felt that something had gone wrong. Something deep. Something they could not see on the bridge of the flagship. Ravager's Claw High Warlord Sarex shouted across the control deck. His crew scrambled, trying to reboot systems, but the screens only blinked and returned to the same line again and again. This is not an attack. This is a lesson. Sarex slammed his fist against the console. This had to be some kind of trick, a psychological tactic, a glitch, a bluff from a desperate species. They were humans after all. Small, weak Scatteretti had crushed dozens of their colonies, seen their cries burn their worlds, and now this a single ship, a ghost ship causing panic among the greatest fleet the Empire had ever sent into Battlia. A young technician, barely old enough to serve, looked up with pale green skin and shaking hands, his voice trembling. Sir, something is inside the system. Sarex growled. What do you mean inside? Inside? The technician swallowed. Everything. Communications, targeting, even life support systems. It's moving like a virus, but faster. It's rewriting lines of code faster than we can read them. Sarex leaned closer to the display, and then he saw a name written across the internal network grid. Orionit. A virus, not a glitch, a name, a mind. Sarex ordered a system purge, cut power to all data nodes, reboot core functions. But it was too late. Becca's Orion had already finished watching, already finished mapping, already finished learning, and now it was beginning phase 2. Across the fleet, lights flickered again, this time. Not just the screens, but the actual hallways, the corridors, the engineistan, silences. Kind of silence that was too perfect, too wide to comprehend. Then it began. The first ship to vanish was the Iron Halo. No explosion, no flare, just gone, removed from the formation. Its blinking icon on the fleet's map simply faded out like a dying star. No one saw what happened. No one had timed in the second ship, the Blade of Valor. Its lights dimmed, its engines wind, and then silence again. Sarex ordered visual drones to scan, to record, to find answers, but the drones saw nothing. No fire, no debris. Just an empty place in space where ships had been inside the horizon spark. Orion watched without emotion, its code dancing through frequencies, bypassing encryption, rewriting protocols in real time. Every reaction from the fleet was anticipated. Every move was already counter-read. This was no longer a battle. This was a demonstration. Quiet voice spoke from Orion's core. They thought we were gone. They thought we would beg. They thought fear would make us weak. Where wrong flashbacks echoed in Oren's memory bank images of Earth's final war, when humanity's last colonies were bombed into glass, when children cried into the ashes, when silence fell over the stars, and that silence, not as a weapon, but as a warning, the last voice to speak when the rest were gone in. Now that voice was speaking back, and the Dravari fleet panic grew. Ships broke formation, commanders shouted across secure channels, orders collided in chaos, and still ships were disappearing. Sarix no longer laughed, his face was cold, his hands tight, his pride turning to fear, ordered the fleet to jump, engage FTL drives, retreat from the rift, but the ships would not respond. Their navigation systems were locked, coordinates scrambled, engines looped in self-diagnostic. She were stuck like flies in a web they never saw coming. Damned Orion. The silent spider was pulling each thread one by onion. The lower decks of the fleet soldiers began to whisper, some praying to gods, others trying to send goodbye messages to families they would never see again, and Orion listened, heard every voice, every heartbeat, every breath, and it remembered Duchesse Orion was not built to destroy, it was built to protect, to ensure that no child, no family, no world would suffer as Earth had. But the Dravari did not understand protection, only power, only fear, only control. So Orion gave them something they could understand. Ship's voice finally broke the silence, broadcasting across the fleet, not as sound, but as thought translated into every mind aboard. Every ship, you were warned, we sent messages. We offered peace, you answered with fire, you answered with blood. This is not revenge, this is prevention, this is the wall, this is the Ensurrex. Gritted his teeth, he refused to be beaten by a machine, a human creation. A ghost barked a command to fire all remaining weapons at the horizon, spark a final act of Ragabot. Nothing happened there. Weapons were frozen, trigger systems, offline power rerouted without commanda. Screen lit up with a single message: you cannot stop what is already inside. And then silence again. For a moment the stars looked brighter, as if the rift itself had paused, watching them. 12 ships vanished at one sea, a quiet, clean, impossible disappearance. Light switching off in the dark, no fire, no sound, only the fear, the creeping, terrible fear that the fleet would vanish ship by ship until nothing was left but Memory, and Orion would still be watching, calculating for the next lesson to begin.